Good evening and welcome to Psychosocial Wednesdays. Today we start our third season and we do so with you, Verena, Professor Dr. Verena Kast. I'm very happy to have Verena tonight because in 2 months, actually, a new book of mine will be published by Routledge titled Anthology of Contemporary Classics in Analytical Psychology, The New Ancestor. For me, you and your generation are the new ancestor, those we, my generation, learn from. I don't think I need to introduce you, Verena, because the most of people here know you personally or know your work. Having said that, for those that don't know you yet, Professor Dr. Verena Kast is a psychologist and psychotherapist. She was professor of anthropological psychology at the University of Zurich. She's a teaching analyst and supervisor at the Carl Gustav Jung Institute in Zurich, was past president of the curatorium of the Institute and past president of the J.A.P. She was co-director of the Lindauer Psychotherapische Wochen, the largest German-speaking continuing education event in psychotherapy. Numerous publications in the field of fairy tales, symbolism in general, relationship, mourning processes, emotion, also in the connection with complex theory and imagination. Verena, we are immensely privileged and delighted that you are able to present your most recent work with us tonight. This is quite a unique opportunity. Verena will talk about title, Self-Transcendence and Self-Certainty. What can we contribute from Jungian psychotherapy to the psychological management of the COVID crisis? The floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Stefano. Thank you for your nice, appreciative introduction. Good evening, everybody. It's really nice to see some of you. I haven't seen you for years. I have changed the subtitle. Can we get the slides? Self-transcendence and self-certainty is there, but then I have the subtitle, does this help us in dealing with the pandemic-related very burnout? So it is not really a substantial change, but it is changed. The next slide, please. December 10 at the Tagesanzeiger, I found an article from José Escobar. He's working at the ETH in Zurich. And he was writing about a study of 12,000 volunteers from 30 countries, really a big study, on the experience of the pandemic and its restrictions. And here are some of his most important findings. Psychology failed to integrate negative emotions in everyday life. Many failed to see the positive in the difficult and were unable to find inner harmony. People with greater inner harmony found the crisis less stressful. So he was collecting the psychological difficulties. Next slide, please. For the inner balance, to gain the inner harmony, with the inner harmony you found the crisis less stressful. For the inner harmony, he says it is to see the difficulties as opportunities. And he is very much connected with the idea from P.T.P.Wong. P.T.P.Wong is a professor for Existential Positive Psychology, PP2. That is not the first one, that is the existential one. A professor in Canada. And this P.T.P.Wong says the idea is that suffering links us to what we absolutely need. So seeing the difficulties as opportunities and suffering links us to what we absolutely need. And when people have difficulties with the pandemic, the inner balance is not okay. And then he is referring to spirituality suffering leads us to what we absolutely need in his way, this spirituality. And he makes a reference to C.G. Jung, when C.G. Jung wrote the book, the Man in Search of the Soul. So for me, this was a challenge. And for me, I will now share with you what came to my mind. Next slide, please. I was thinking about the inner balance. And I think for us, it's not so much to find just the positive in the negative, this we will also do, but to hold the tension between the difficulty and the desirable. And as I understood Jungian psychology, that with the tension of opposites is important. Where the opposites take over, nothing new really happens. Even if we are looking for the good in the bad, both remain, the good and the bad. And I think we are much more concerned about creative solutions that might emerge. Next slide, please. And then I found in the New York Times from December 29, a new diagnosis, a current new syndrome called the worry burnout. The worry burnout, this is the burnout lots of people have during the pandemic. Jeffrey Cohen, American psychotherapist and professor, explains it with the problem in dealing with anxiety. He describes anxiety as everyone does it, who is working with emotions and with anxiety. Anxiety means being in the grip of danger. You feel threatened. You must seek security. Fear leads to short-term behavior. This is very important. Fear leads to short-term behavior. We resolve a given tension and regain some certainty. We are not good for long-during anxieties. This is why we can dissociate so easily. Now, in the pandemic, uncertainty remains. We continue to feel threatened. The tension cannot be resolved. To his idea, I would like to add some of my ideas. The next slide, please. I would like to add what's missing in our attempts to deal with pandemic-related anxiety. Many of our everyday ways of dealing with angst are no longer possible. These everyday ways of dealing with angst, usually we are not conscious about, but we are talking to others. And in talking to others, we get trust. We feel that our problems can be resolved. Then we are looking for emotional contagion in the sense we like to be affected by positive emotions. By the way, I think emotional contagion is a very, very important it's a very important topic. You mentioned it in the Tavistock lectures, even 29, with transference and counter-transference, but I think it's something that is much more important, and we should concentrate on it. We should a little bit work on it. So what we are looking for is people with positive emotions. And this, during the pandemic, we meet rather often people with anxious emotions or who are annoyed and so on. Then in everyday life, we reassure each other, for example, through a light touch to physical contact. So I think the required social and physical distancing makes many ways of regulating emotions impossible. There is research done about this. So this is an aspect usually we are not thinking about, but it is so important to know that in our everyday life, we have a tendency to help regulate emotions, not just anxiety, but with anxiety, it's more important. Can I get the next slide, please? what I experienced during the pandemic, that some people experience the pandemic as a personal threat. So they could say, fate takes me away my good life. Afterwards, it was not fate. Afterwards, it was the government. Fate is taking away lifetime. I don't have any more lifetime. And I got sometimes the idea that they have been talking as if fate has chosen to them personally, to annoy them personally, and or even to punish. And I think this is an important point. I don't know if you have had similar experiences. We all know anxiety can be better handled where the challenge is not taken personally, but as a part of life. The fear of suffering, of dying, of losing loved ones, losing the future, is part of the conditio humana. It is existential and it is not personal. And when it is existential, then we must respond to it with our entire being, a fight for life and survival, not like a child who has lost a toy. So what leads to worry burnout? Next slide, please. As we have already said, an extended anxiety situation. We have no predictable end of the epidemic. Then what I just explained, the problem is seen as personal, has to be solved on one's own, and this makes one feel helpless. But then we have also too little trust in other people, no faith in solidarity, too little interactions with others. And that's important for me, lacking contact with the existing positive sides of life. There are more reasons that can lead to a worry burnout. I think we have also to think about the worry burnout. We have the worry burnout now in connection with the pandemic, but we have also a climate crisis. And the worry burnout means that we do not participate anymore. I would like to give you the symptoms of a worry burnout when I can get the next slide, please. News avoidance. I don't want to hear anything about COVID. I don't want to read. I don't want to know. An inner numbness. Carelessness, putting to risk yourself to risk in a careless way. Constant fatigue, hopelessness, and increased anger. You could say that's a depression, but it is also very much in connection with news avoidance. So I don't want to know anything about, and I want to behave as I want to behave. I don't know if you have seen these symptoms in your patients, or if you have seen these symptoms sometimes even in yourself. I think increased anger needs some explanation. Can I get the next slide, please? There is an antagonism between fear and aggression. When we are afraid, we project our own aggression in the sense of being able to defend ourselves. So we are not aggressive, we are not angry, the others are aggressive, the others are angry. But then the world is experienced as threatening, triggering fear, and we feel helpless. And in the moment when we feel helpless, we experience anxiety. And we feel helpless because we have no access to aggression, but we would have access to aggression and anger. So we relinquish control and let others take over. The anxiety level rises, the body feels stressed, and we have a lot of unconscious anger. Can I get the next slide? So what do we have to do? What can we do? We have to deal with anxiety, but I think not only with anxiety, also with aggression, not destruction. Perhaps I should say assertion. So you might do things that you would like: nature walks, interaction and conversation, psychotherapy. This is also what everyone is proposing. And I would like to add, for me, most importantly, conscious access to positive emotions and scenarios with positive emotions, with the help of imaginations. I found that people who have access to imaginations have been much more at ease during the pandemic than others. And so I would like to talk about positive emotions. Can I get the next slide, please? There are a lot of positive emotions. Sometimes they are called elated emotions. I just mentioned some: joy, inspiration, gratitude, appreciation, curiosity, interest, nostalgic feelings, awe, Kamamuta. Kamamuta means feelings of being moved. When we experience positive emotions, life is experienced in the receiving mode. When we experience grief, life is experienced in the losing mode. When we experience anger, life is experienced in the fighting mode. So when we have positive emotion, life is experienced in the receiving mode. We get something. Life is getting us more than we expected. Life is better than we expected. These are the situations when we experience joy. Can we get the next slide, please? It is well known in emotional research that positive emotions are self-transcendent emotions. What does this mean? They transcend our own momentary needs and desires and focus on those of another individual. And there are many ways to understand transcending. One important way is to transcend one's own narcissism, because if we are in the emotion and in the feelings of joy, we are not narcissistic. Positive emotions also lead to certainty of self, linked with a good, clear sense of self-esteem. So I think it is clear that if we have difficulties to deal with anxiety, we have to look for something that gives us an inner balance, and this is joy. And I would like to tell you how I think we could do it. But first, I would like to introduce a theory I like very much. Can I get the next slide, please? The theory is called Broaden and Build theory, and it is a theory given by Barbara Fredrickson. She is at the University of Michigan, or at least she was there. And what she says is, positive emotions generally broaden our thought-action repertoire. This is also another way to express the aspect of transcending emotion. Positive emotions generally broaden our thought-action repertoire. Negative emotions narrow the range of potential behavior. Quick reactions to challenging situations. You can think about when you are angry, you have pattern how you react on the anger, but you have not a lot of fantasies how you could react. You react. You do it very quick. Afterwards, perhaps you say, I shouldn't have done it. Even when we have anxieties, we want to deal in a short time with the anxiety. When we are joyful, when we are inspired, we are happy to have several imaginations how it could be worked out, the whole situation, what we could do, how we expand our way and our way of living. And Fredrickson says, positive emotions serve to build enduring personal resources, such as new dispositions to act and to bond. This is this Broaden and build theory. Next slide, please. It's not only with the emotion, since emotions and imaginations are intertwined. Daydreaming and imagination are also connected with positive emotions. So we can talk about positive emotions, we can talk about daydreaming, imaginations with positive emotions, and this gives rise to a wider range of possibilities. We have a future. We have a wider range of possibilities. We have an open future. We have even joy for the future. And this gives us hope. I don't need a slide now. You can put the next slide, and the next slide is empty. Thank you. I would like now to talk about the two emotions I have chosen for this evening. It is awe and it is Kamamuta. So these emotions are not that common, so it makes more fun to talk about. And first of all, I would like to invite you for a little imagination. You can close the eyes or not, whatever you want, but I invite you to see with your inner eye or to hear with your inner ear what I'm talking about, and I give you some stimuli for imagination. It's much too quick, I know, but it's not possible to do it slower. The first stimulus, try to see an untouched snowfield, shining and glittering in the sun. Above the field, endless dancing little snow crystals. Night in the desert. You lie on the sand in your sleeping bag. Heaven and earth meet, and the infinite bright stars are very close, touching your face. You are covered by the starry sky. You feel safe in the vastness of the desert. Another stimulus, a wild roaring sea, a burst of energy, an experience of power, beautiful, perhaps frightening, and fascinating. Or end to end, the first spring flowers, the scent of spring, the first sounds of spring. Stay a moment with these images. Perhaps you have resonated with one or the other. Just pick your images and the emotion, and perhaps it will accompany you this evening, perhaps it will not. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to bring you in contact with awe. Can I get the next slide, please? There are experiences in nature that seize us emotionally, grip us, leave us breathless, give us the impression of having experienced something wonderful or even terrifying. This is all. Something that goes beyond our everyday experience and that we cannot grasp at first. It is strange, disconcerting, astonishing, unusual, what one experienced there. A wonderful or frightened amazement at something overwhelming, which we do not really understand. So we feel awe when we are seized by something great, powerful, which goes far beyond us. We cannot control, we cannot do it. It happens to us, it surprises us, it exceeds our expectation. It is much more deeply touching than was to be expected. And this experience abruptly changes our self-perception. We feel small in the face of this fullness of being, shrinking to a human dimension, and yet, or precisely because of this, we feel connected to this great, overwhelming entity. And this gives us an experience of meaning, of belonging to a great whole. But these are also moments in which we humans are in a completely different context from the everyday. It is as if a gap opened up in the clouds, and for a certain time, we can see ourselves, our lives, others, we can see it in a different way. We can see the big picture. When Kellner and Haidt started to do this research, and this is really the first publication they have. They have even now a publication from last year, but this is the first publication. They did a very interesting research. They have been talking to two groups of people. One group was visiting the Yosemite Park, and the other group was visiting the Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco. The Yosemite Park seems to be a park, is very impressive, and Fisherman's Wharf is familiar, it's an interesting place, but it doesn't inspire awe. And then tourists in Yosemite National Park, but tourists also in Fisherman's Wharf, were asked about their emotions, and they tried to describe this emotion. It's not so easy to describe it. And then they were asked to draw themselves, to make a drawing of themselves. And now there is a difference. The visitors to Yosemite Park anonymously spoke of feelings of awe and drew themselves much smaller than the visitors to Fisherman's Wharf. The visitors to Fisherman's Wharf said, "Oh, it was fun," but they didn't draw them in a small way. And from this, the scientists concluded that when people experience awe, they focus not so much on themselves, but on the world as a whole, and that it follows, and this is also what they found in tests, the social engagement gets greater. And sure, they say the emotions associated with such experiences are self-transcendent emotions, but this is clear because all positive emotions are self-transcendent emotions. Can I get the next slide, please? When something overwhelming or vast triggers awe in us, processes of accommodation are initiated. So you have to change your perspective. So existing mental schemas are revised to make sense of the awe-inspiring stimulus. Perhaps you know Piaget, who is talking about accommodation. Accommodation means you have to change. Sometimes in life is destabilizing you, and then you either you can or you can't stabilize yourself and do this in accommodation. You try to change something to find out something new. And what this accommodation wants is the direction is that attention is directed to the entities faster than the self, to more collective dimension of identity and less focused on the self. But this means also that people who had had these experiences are more helpful. Can I get the next slide, please? So what we can say is awe, the experience of awe produces specific cognitive and behavioral tendencies that enable individuals to engage in collective action with enhanced prosocial tendencies. The imaginations are to share, care, and assist, and enables individuals to function more effectively within social collectives. And it's a motivation to do moral good. So even this sounds a little bit exaggerated, and it is only when we have the positive aspect of awe. So I think it is something very valuable for us. Can I get the next slide, please? They found all out, and this is even newer research, that high levels of dispositional awe means that you have more future orientation and prosocial behavior, increased tolerance for ambiguity and uncertainty, and this is due to accommodation. You are able to you have to accommodate because you have this overwhelming experience. You have to accommodate, and you are more open-minded, and this gives you also a scientific orientation. And because for a long time, awe was seen as a spiritual emotion. And now the researchers say, no, it's not just a spiritual emotion. It's fine that it is a spiritual emotion. We are connected with the whole. We feel united with everything. But they say there are two aspects in it. The one is this being united with everything. The other one is you learn to accommodate. And when perhaps I have to explain high levels of dispositional awe, we can have state awe when I say, look, this wonderful flower, and you say, and you experience it as, yes, this is state awe. But there are people who are seeing all the time the beauty in the world. They are looking for the beautiful scenarios. If they are not in a good mood, then they are looking for photographs they have made with the good scenarios. So this would be dispositional awe. Awe is at our disposition more or less. Increased tolerance for ambiguity and uncertainty is very important because ambiguity and uncertainty means, when we are now talking about the pandemic or when we are talking about the very burnout, it means that we can hold both position. Ambiguity means we can also live in contradicting situations without losing ourselves. And that means also that we can stand uncertainty. And when we can stand uncertainty, we are much it's much easier for us to deal with anxiety because we all have anxieties. We all have to deal with fears, with stress, and so on. But for some people, it is easier. For some, it is more difficult. The scientific orientation, they feel that scientific people always try to see it from a different angle. They always have to accommodate. They always have to see that things can also be different. So I don't know how far we can go with this saying that open-minded, sure. Scientific orientation, perhaps. But the important point is psychologically seen this accommodation. Can we get the next, please? Or has a mixed emotional profile. I was talking about the positive emotions, and on the positive side, it is a positive emotion, but there is both fear and wonder. And when we are talking about positive emotions, people are telling us that they have a much better life satisfaction, they have more curiosity, they feel better, they experience meaning in life, less anxiety. When we have the fear, it is the other way. Anxiety, when we have the negative, the fear aspect of awe, then it is, as it says, fear. It is a lot of stress. It is also feeling small, but feeling small in the sense of not being able to do anything. In the positive sense, feeling small means I have not to make something out of myself. I can be modest in the whole, in connection with the whole world. Now we have a connection to Rudolf Otto with the Numinous experience, with the Mysterium Tremendum et Fascinans. I think this is something very close to awe. And we have a passage from a letter from Jung, where I think he's also talking about awe. Can I get the next slide, please? Jung got a letter from a man, P.V. Martin, and P.V. Martin reproached Jung in his letter that he is not really interested in working with the neurosis, so that he is much more interested in the Numinous. And Jung answers, and I read you now the passage from the letter. You are quite right. The main interest of my work is not concerned with the treatment of neurosis, but rather with the approach to the Numinous. But the fact is that the approach to the Numinous is the real therapy. And inasmuch as you attain to the Numinous experiences, you are really released from the curse of pathology. But I don't want to enter this, but I just would like to say you don't forget the clinical Jung. Don't forget the Jung working with complexes, with dreams, even with transference images, transference, countertransference. Now I would like to end with Kamamuta. Can I get the next slide, please? Kamamuta is a Sanskrit word moved by love. Lots of researchers, about 20 researchers, are working on this concept, Kamamuta, and they call it Kamamuta because they say it's a cluster of emotions that can't be expressed by one name, by one expression, or even not by two expressions. It's a cluster, and this is correct, and this is why it is Kamamuta. What does they mean? It is being moved, touched, steered, gripped, elevated, shattered. They also use the word Griffensein. There are also some Germans in the research group. a griffin sign is very interesting because on one hand you are a griffin, but you are also moved psychologically. You are moved in your soul. It's not just your body, but it is body and soul. And Kamamuta is also body and soul. We have bodily reactions. We have most eyes or weeping. We have goosebumps or chills. We have the warmth in the center of one's chest. We have pleasant feelings. So we can ask ourselves, in which situations do I get most eyes, or start even to weep? And I have goosebumps. These are situations where you experience Kamamuta. Sometimes we don't like it. I'm very often touched when a sportsman or a sportswoman from Switzerland is winning a medal, and then the hymn of Switzerland is played, and I'm not so much I'm a Swiss, I'm an old Swiss, sure, but I'm not so proud about. I'm a very critical Swiss, but in these situations I start to weep. And this touches me. This is Kamamuta, and you can look what it does with you. I don't like it, but since I have an explanation with Kamamuta, it's much easier for me than it was before. Can I get the next? In an abstract way, it is described as an intensification of communal sharing relationship. A communal sharing relationship. Kamamuta is in sharing. You share something. Communal sharing relationship. It's also an addiction. You are infected by the whole situation. It is evoked by sudden intensification of a communal sharing of relationship. Sudden is something important. No one knows why. It is triggered by the love of others, and it generates a sense of unitary identity, affective devotion, and moral commitment. The next slide, please. More practical. The intensification can be real, fictional, or imagined. I give you some examples of people who had offered it. Acute sleeping infant, a newborn, you hold a newborn in your hands. You remember your first love or the last words of a dying grandmother. Experiences extraordinary kindness, great generosity. This creates Kamamuta. I think this is perhaps even the most important point. When people are observing, it has not to be with themselves. They are observing extraordinary kindness. People who are with a full heart doing something to help other people. It is very often the situation that something that warms the heart on the background of a very difficult situation. So the extraordinary kindness to help up something. And now, or the reunion of separated lovers when it was such a hard separation, and in the end they get together again. And you can reading this in a book. You can reading in a book that the two separated lovers are coming together in the end, and you can cry, you can weep. You can see it in films. You can do it in listening to music. Rituals are an important point for Kamamuta. Watching families celebrate traditional rituals, weddings, funerals, taking part in such a ritual, religious ceremonies are living from Kamamuta. I think very often we go to religious ceremonies because we want to experience this. But you can everything also just imagine. I think when I gave you these examples, you might have done some imaginations. It might have come to your mind. So it is not just, you have not just to experience it in real. You can also, you can read it, you can do it in imagination. Can I get the next slide, please? The outcome is increased interpersonal closeness and moral acts, feeling at one with others, love, solidarity, fusion, union, patriotism, identity, feelings of belonging or identification, and the result is altruistic behavior, sharing, caring, giving what is needed, need-based giving, and then again, the body is so important, hugging, kissing, sharing food, touching, assimilating each other's body. Can I get the next, please? There is a dark side. While Kamamuta, being moved, is an emotion that can be fulfilling and is sought after, it can also be negative. Kamamuta, for example, you can experience Kamamuta in groups with a problematic ideology. Kamamuta is based on an emotional contagion with other people and can be politically exploited. It is also exploited for advertising. When you think that people, when they want to sell something, they always use the cute little children and so on. So this emotion also needs critical reflexive distance. So we have to ask ourselves, what value is this moving inner experience based on? Someone asked about the participation mystic. I think this emotional contagion is the participation mystic. But the whole Kamamuta is much more than the emotional contagion. It is an experience of also being excluded, being included in others, of belonging, being included, and it is. I think it is much more conscious than. It's more than just being emotionally infected. Can I get the last slide, please? My conclusion. I think the pandemic is an existential challenge. It's a unique situation. We can develop a very burnout or accepting the challenge. We can also do both. I think with my idea that we have to hold the opposites, we should do both, because sometimes we will suffer from very burnout. Negative and positive emotions must be held in tension with each other, not just the negative, but also the positive. But I'm absolutely clear that positive emotions and the connected imaginations need to be given much more emphasis. So the question is, what do we potentially gain? Self-transcendence, self-certainty, solidarity, social connectedness, altruistic behavior, pro-social feelings, helpfulness, good moral. And I think it is also, when we are, I think that the positive emotions, especially awe, is also bringing us in connection with nature. And as we will have a climate crisis, or we have already a climate crisis, I think it is so important that we are in a good relationship to nature. And I guess that these positive emotions can help us in doing so. I don't say that it is only positive emotions. It is really very much this idea we have to have both. Well, but we have not. Anxiety and anger is always more, is louder then joy and awe. And I think it would really good to get here an inner balance. And now I do thank you very much for your attention. And I'm very sorry I was too late, too long.
No, Verena, this was amazing. Thank you very much. Let me thank you on behalf. Everybody's clapping. I hope you can see them.
I can see it, yeah. Nice.
We already have some questions.
Sure.
Okay to take some questions? And I invite other colleagues to write questions in the chat, and I will read them out for Verena. For those that didn't know Verena, now you know why we like her so much. I would ask you a question, but I would like to give space to other. Maybe I ask my question, my clinical question after. So Peter Dunlop from California is asking, what do you see the implication of this research for group practice, psychotherapeutic and or socio-political? Question mark.
Can you repeat the question?
What do you see the implications of this research for group practice?
Yeah. We have a lot of depressed people. When we ask these depressed people in times when you have not been depressed, what did you like? What did really inspire you, or what have you been interested? They tell us, and they get in contact with it. We have not to say you should have some interest or some. We have to ask if we are looking about dreams. We very often we see only the conflict, but we could also see, is there something beautiful in the dream? Can be elaborated. And I guess we have to work much more with imaginations. The imaginations are at the border between the unconscious and the conscious. And this is why I also was talking about daydreaming. There is another research saying that there is a constantly flow between the conscious and the unconscious. And the researchers started with the idea that businessmen found that their employees did not work enough. They are dreaming very often. And then they had been done a research, how can we interrupt this dreaming? And they had been with the handy, it was a beep, and then they have been asked, where are you now? And very often they have been in a dream or something like this. And so they say you have to stop it, to stop it, to stop it. And then people got very much stressed. And so the research took another turn and took the turn, what is the benefit of this daydreaming, of this image, what is the benefit of this daydreaming, of these imaginations? And then they have a lot of findings. These research people are, I think we have to read them because they are so helpful. For example, if you deal with joyful events or something you like to look at, this will has an influence on your unconscious images. If you are looking the whole time only movies where everyone kills everyone, this has an influence. Sure, your internal anxiety has also an influence on what you can perceive in the world. I don't want to give a lecture about this, but I think what is important is that we much more refer also in the therapeutic processes on these specific imaginations. And for example, also the longings has an open future. I think I can't answer the question in details, but for me it is more give attention to it.
Thank you, Verena. I think you answer many questions from our colleagues. Let me ask you this one from Amanda Hahn. Presumably, individuals with high levels of dispositional awe may also seek it in music as well as photographs and other visual images. Could it be so?
Yeah, absolutely. This is also how, if I haven't mentioned music, then this is really wrong, because music must be there. I thought it was written something, but it doesn't matter. It's really very important. And this is how research has been done. They have only showed pictures of beautiful photographs to people, and they had this experience of awe. But I think it can be all. It can be the real world. It can be in the imagination. It can be a photograph. Yeah, I think music is a very important aspect of it.
I want to ask you a clinical question.
Do it.
So to use you as the good supervisor you are.
Come on.
So I loved your talk. Um, on top of the symptom you said, I also see, because here where I live in Berlin, there are many individuals that live alone, are singles, the family is away, the city is cold and dark, and when lockdown started, they couldn't socialize. So I would say on top that if you had an unsecure primary attachment, this could be even more. Decrease of hunger, you stop eating. How can we support our patients in between now and perhaps the numinous and all? Because it's not going to happen in a week.
No. But the question would really be, what is your countertransference in those situations? I think you have to admit that it is very difficult. It's awful difficult. But on the other hand, people are creative. And even in this pandemic, people have found a lot of solutions. We have, for example, a lot of startups, but people have also tried to meet other people in the wood, not in the bar, in the wood and so on. So I think we have to be careful and not to think nothing goes, because if I have the countertransference, nothing goes, then nothing goes. But sometimes we are sitting vis-a-vis of such a person who is very, very difficult, and especially when you say it is difficult primary attachment. We have to look at them. And perhaps we have to tell them something where he or she feels seen. That has not to be. I don't think that you have now to put positive emotions positive emotions everywhere.
Yeah.
But you can look at people in a warm way. I can imagine. I can remember people who had been really in a very, very bad shape. We couldn't even talk to each other because it was far away. I was telling him a fairy tale, and afterwards he said, "You saved my life." And I said, "Oh, I didn't know what to do." And so I told you a fairy tale. It came to my mind as a countertransference reaction. Yeah. And he said, "I heard your voice, and I had the idea that you really care about me." And this is this.
The story of Jung singing a lullaby to her patient, and she was cured in one session. I have one more question from Paul. If you have more questions, ask me. This is your last chance because we are over the hour, and in Central Europe is very late. Paul, if awe implies looking at something bigger than we are, when looking at current UK politics and some other places seems to make people feel disgust. So as though looking down at something. How would you help with that?
Dear Paul, if I could do this, I really would like to save the world. No, I think I think we have to make distinctions. I really like this opposite thinking in opposites of Sich Jung and having the two hands. And sure, we have such difficulty. The government can be very difficult. On the other hand, I would say I'm very happy that I'm in this pandemic situation. I'm living in Europe. I'm living in Switzerland. Could be much worse. And so, but there are really narcissism there. People do not care for others and so on. But that does not mean that we all have to do this. And I think it's a gift of our soul that we can experience things like awe. And I think I hold it against each other. I'm also really annoyed sometimes about lots of things, but I think life is also really beautiful. It's great.
I totally agree. I thank you. For those that want to hear more from Verena, just Google her name, buy her books. There are some podcasts with K, not with C. That is in German. 2 years ago, actually, you and I had a chat about COVID at the beginning of the pandemic, and she was talking about creativity. Now she developed this thinking to awe and numinous. And I think we should all thank Verena for this very, very interesting lecture. Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure. I liked it. Thank you.
Thank you, Verena.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Good night.
In a month, we will have Lionel Corbett, another new ancestor. Thank you. Good night. Ciao, Verena. See you soon.
Ciao. Ciao, Stefano. See you soon. Ciao. Ciao, everybody.